Yeah, it's not for me. Reddit for me is a wonderful place to find out information on motorcycles and porn. That's about it. Next up, we've got an email from Dawn.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Herfin, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Westworld. I am one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Ash.
Hi, y'all.
And this is our Telegraph edition, where we look back on this week's episode of Westworld and provide our feedback on the top listener emails and voicemail for the week. Again, this week's episode was Season 4, Episode 1, The Auguries. And we want to send a special thank you to everybody who's been sending in your voicemails via the SpeakPipe feature. So if you go to shatpod.com/TV, Big D has set up a wonderful feature that allows you to record directly from your device through our website. And the audio quality has been fantastic. And you guys have been pouring in those voicemails way more than we've ever had. So we're really excited to get to those. And if you'd like to email, that's okay too. You can always email us, host@shatontv.com, and share your thoughts there. Again, if your voicemail or email doesn't make this episode, it will be on our website later. So we'll do our best to get everybody a response. And let's start with the first voicemail. This one comes from B-Dubs.
As compelling as this show has been, and as erratic several of the seasons have been, I think they really needed to grab the viewer on this first episode in Season 4. Sadly, they failed. What do y'all think?
I mean, I think I made fairly clear on the Instacast that I don't think that they were as successful as they could have been, let's say. But I did like it more on reflection and on rewatch. I have to be very, very honest. My biggest concern is that this audience has already shrunk pretty significantly over the seasons. And I think we were having a conversation off air when we were starting to like kind of prep for all of this. And I said to Eugene and to Big D, I said, you know, all of my friends that I watched this show with, none of them other than you two watch it anymore. And so when I talked, I was like, hey guys, like we're gearing up to do Westworld on, you know, Shat on TV. They're like, have so much fun. We're going to watch House of the Dragon and, you know, wait for that. And so I think that that's my biggest fear. It isn't really that we're not going to get a better season. It's that I'm worried the story won't get finished because enough people won't be watching anymore if they don't do something to grab people's interest.
Yeah, and B-Dub's question for everybody listening isn't necessarily do we think it's still going to be a good show, but rather did Season 4, Episode 1 do a good job grabbing viewers? And I look at it in two different ways. One is, did it do a good job of attracting new viewers? So if you'd never watched the show before and you got talked into watching it or you saw an ad for it and you put it on, does this grab your attention as a new viewer? I don't think it does. I think you'd be like, what the hell is going on? I don't have any attachment to these characters. It's too confusing, whatever. For longtime viewers, as again, I said on the deep dive and the Instacast, it didn't do enough to attach me emotionally to the characters. Am I going to stick with it? Of course. I think the payoff will come. But in the first episode, not so much. But there was lots to talk about, and the theories have already started flying in. We've got some great ones from first-time writers and also long-time listeners like Gillian.
Hello, Shat Crew. Long time no talk. So thankful you guys started the season off right with a deep dive into the show's titles. I had been looking them over when I started to think about the connection the titles have with each other. Specifically, Episode 3, Année Folle, and Episode 4, Generation Lost, and Episode 8, Que Sera, Sera. I could be grasping at straws here, so no big deal if this is considered tinfoil and therefore a spoilerish territory. It's more wishful thinking. Anyway, the 3 episode titles jumped out at me because of their relationship to France and the period of time between World War I and World War II. As explained wonderfully by you three, the episode title for Episode 3 is The Roaring Twenties of France. During that period, artists, writers, and creatives flocked to France. One particular artist of interest thrived in this period, Gertrude Stein. Now, we know Westworld has referenced Gertrude before. I believe it was Dr. Ford who mentions her in the first season. But what did Gertrude do? She coined the generation of men and women born between 1883 to 1900 as the lost generation, which she felt was the disoriented, wandering, directionless spirit of men and women who survived World War I. Hemingway took the phrase and ran with it. Typical man running away with a woman's idea, but it was Gertrude herself. Generation loss, which again is perfectly defined by U3, describes the loss of quality between subsequent copies. But it is also the name of an art installation by Alvin Lucier, who recorded himself speaking in a room and then re-recorded himself playing back that dialogue over and over until there were no more recognizable words. But the fact that this episode is preceded by Année Fois, and the fact that there was an art performance named the same thing, could it also be a nod to Lost Generation, Gertrude Stein? There is also a poem by Jonathan Reed titled Lost Generation that can be read both backwards and forwards. Poetry seems to be the love language of Nolan and Joy, so just the more, the better armed you'll be type of thing. Que sera, sera, again, the French term, whatever will be, but more specifically, it was a song sung by Doris Day in the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Now, Hitchcock made a movie with this exact title in 1934, that period again, and decided to redo it later on. The two movies are similar in the overall plot devices, but they do have their major differences. However, one of the main elements in both movies, spoiler, is they have both a French man named Louis Bernard, who is a secret French intelligence agent, who warns the couple prior to his death about an assassination. After his death, the couple must avoid the killers who are looking for them as they know about the assassination. In the 1956 version, Doris Day's character sings Que sera, sera to distract the killers and save the day and gets her kidnapped child back. So the short of it, in the 7 years that pass between season 3 and where we will be season 4, there's some evidence to substantiate a notion that this season will be the cautionary tale of how after you think you've won the Great War, if you stop looking for the burning embers, they will find a way to start a new fire, even worse than before. Well, this is way longer than anticipated because I don't know how to keep it brief. As always, thank you for all of your valiant service to us, the Shat fans. Gillian.
Now, Gillian's email, as always, has much more to it. So if you want to read it in its entirety, you can go to shatpod.com/TV and check it out under the Westworld Telegraph. But as always, she's giving us a lot to chew on here. The most important part to me is I thought that there was going to be a loose correlation between some of the titles, some of the literary references that we get this season. But in fact, it seems like it is not only thematically connected, but also connected as an era, right? And she really described that World War I to World War II era. And basically, if we do look at that era, we can kind of see those social movements and how we can kind of connect that to a robot uprising or a change in the world order. Thanks, Gillian, for your email. Next up, we have one from Dave Wright, who just squeaked in under the wire with his email.
When Dave wrote in and said, Jean, Ash, Big D. So great to see you guys were spun up out of cold storage to host the 4th installment of this epic HBO series, Westworld. I shared your surprise at the pacing on first viewing, but I accepted that the writers needed to do a lot of world repair after the apocalyptic ending of season 3, so I'm cutting them a little bit of slack. My sense of the arc of season 4 centers on William's quest to secure and eventually decrypt the guest data that is now held at the Hoover Dam site. The William we see is a biological recreation of human William who has successfully passed the fidelity test. He is working with Auguries on 2 fronts. One is using Delos hosts to prevent revolutionaries like Maeve and Caleb from interfering with his true goal, immortality of humans, by eliminating the mistakes of natural selection that result in death. And this is achieved by making the fidelity process work on a mass scale. This plotline can supply the action and conflict that is needed in a grand epic. Because this goal needs human data and the park source is currently encrypted, he and Auguries have created the augmented virtual reality that is shared by Christina beings and actual humans. This is produced by the tower and the tower-like streetlights that maintain the illusion 24/7. It is like the Forge, but includes biohuman sensory processing with synthetic host processing. This is why we don't see it in Letterbox. It is now part of our human world. The humans don't need the sensors in their hats anymore to be recorded. Maybe the entire city has a fly infestation. Whatever William's grand scheme may be, I think we will find that he, like Maeve and Caleb, wants to restore the most precious thing in his life that he killed, his daughter. My really far-out speculation is that the character that appears as Teddy to Christina in Meta World is actually young William, who William created for his classic group therapy session at the Sonoma Lab. His objective is to hack her, using sophisticated human engineering to create a story that requires her to create a personal encryption key that William hopes will unlock the park data. This story can be looped as many times as necessary, using a trial and error strategy for a key that works. Getting this done in 8 episodes is ambitious, but if they can span this arc to a 5th season, it might not be impossible. Thanks, Dave Wright from San Diego.
So, Dave, I want to start off by saying I applaud your confidence. While we're just kind of hand-wringing going, maybe it's guest data, maybe it's host data. You're like, no, it's guest data. And that is the Man in Black. He's been fidelity tested. I like the confidence here. A couple things that you touched on that were really interesting to me. One was the streetlights shaped like the tower. I did not pick up on the shape of them, but you're absolutely right. They are tower-like in their shape, and they did have that flickering as she was moving by. I thought that it was sort of a energy-saving feature, but it could be a projection or a sensory feature as well. I like that idea. Get into the immortality of humans as like a form of evolution. This would be interesting in the sense that if the Man in Black was somehow influenced by Dr. Ford's ideas on evolution, Dr. Ford recognized the host as potential evolution, right? They could go beyond what we could do as humans. Perhaps the Man in Black has some different ideas there, but I just can't see the Man in Black being that magnanimous with his intentions. It doesn't seem to fit his character. And then Ash, she also touched on that idea of a William inside of that Teddy body, which is something that you had suggested. And I wonder what you thought of that.
I'm very confident after, reading some things in our community, like our chat community, and, just rewatching the episode. I'm very confident that I don't think that this is Teddy Flood. I think this is going to be someone else. Now, as far as who that someone else is, I think that's going to be very interesting. We have a voicemail coming up that I think may lend us a little bit of a clue to that. So I don't want to give that away. But I do think you're onto something here in the sense that this world, and first of all, I love the term meta world, because this very much is quite meta, right? In this meta world, I think that there's something off, and there's something off with Dolores, and whether or not it is that she is a part of a fidelity test and truly is that non-player character here, or whether or not she has more agency, I think only time will tell, but it makes it a whole lot more interesting than it did on first watch.
Thanks, Dave, for your email. Next up, we're moving to Central Pennsylvania to Susan, who also wants to talk about the Man in Black.
When Susan writes in and says, "Hi guys, so glad to have Westworld and your TV podcast back. The property that MIB is after at Hoover Dam must be the information from Westworld that Dolores took last season. He can't get to it, but he and probable Charloris don't want anyone else using it. And the flies were a very Beelzebubian moment. Fitting though, since dealing with the Man in Black is pretty close to dealing with the devil. Did Teddy stave Christina from Peter when he attacked her outside her apartment? Most likely. How and why did he disappear, though? She still had the cut, so something happened to her. Is Maeve being able to access marble memories a new thing? And when Maeve was remembering her daughter, sad music, and Caleb, I am rather concerned that Caleb was gut shot, because that's a difficult wound to survive without immediate medical intervention. Or it could just be the moment he decided to stop fighting, find a wife, and raise a family. So many callbacks to season 1. Christina's whole morning routine and an easel in the corner, white shoes, black shoes, Man in Black telling the guy you can rest now, like the text telling the host to sleep, the close-up of the wheat grains, although fields of grain happened in all 3 seasons, the maze on Christina's patio. I know there's more that I'm forgetting. These are just some thoughts, and while I'm not disappointed with the first episode, I hope all the setup has a payoff. One final thought. Flies are often seen as an omen or perhaps augury of the devil. Thank you for the podcast and good times. Susan from Central PA.
Thanks, Susan, for writing in. The Teddy question is interesting because I took that as the only time we've seen people disappear on this show has been when it's in loops, right? Particularly in season 1, when we saw that Dolores thought she was on adventures with young William, or thought she was encountering the Man in Black, or thought that she was talking to Bernard or Arnold, and in fact found out she was all by herself walking through those memories again. And so it might be a hint that she is going through loops as well, which is substantiate the simulation concept as well.
I think the other thing that's really important to think about here is this whole idea of the flies that she's bringing up. I mean, we've talked about the fly's vision, but I do agree that you can't help but connect them to bad omens or connect them to a Christian thought of a devil or death or decaying. You know, this is something Stephen King uses a lot in The Shining and in Dr. Sleep. The little boy that grows up, Danny, the way that he knows that someone's going to die is they have flies covering their face, right? Like there's something to do with like an oncoming death. And I'll be curious to see if these fly nanobots or fly hosts, or, you know, we haven't really figured out the science yet, whatever they are, if they continue to come up and if they are, you know, really that direct omen of that blackness, of that evil, of that dark side, just kind of manifesting itself and continuing to build that metaphor.
In our deep dive, we broke down the Auguries, the title of the episode, and what it could mean, what it could be referencing. One of our listeners, Landon, wrote in to talk about that.
Well, Landon said, pertaining to Blake's auguries of innocence mentioned in the latest podcast of season 4, episode 1, Ford quotes the first 4 lines of this poem in season 2, episode 7, when Bernard meets him in the cradle. Love the show. Thanks, Landon. I think this is amazing because I was asking on the deep dive for more Robert Ford. I was asking for Anthony Hopkins to return. And could this be an omen, an augury, if you will, that Robert Ford may return? Probably not, but it's really nice to see the connections. This is such a deep cut. Thank you so much, Landon, for finding this. I have to tell you that when I read this email, I got so flipping excited because it just mentioned Robert Ford. And I was like, oh my God, there it is. So maybe he'll come back in flashbacks, if nothing else. But I think it definitely shows that the brilliance of these showrunners. I think one of the things we said that's the most true on our initial episode, like the preview, is that even if Westworld's not good, it's going to be one of the best things on television. And this is an example of why, because these showrunners are brilliant in the way that they connect things, because this is not accidental, right? It's not accidental that this has happened. So Landon, you're awesome. This is why I love our chat community, because otherwise I wouldn't have found this out.
Different people have different ideas of fun. This is my idea of fun, like just
For sure.
burying things everywhere and letting us discover them as a group. That's a party. I don't need to watch anything that's, you know, slapstick, yuck. This is fun to me.
It is. And if only Big D were here, he'd be going, keep it simple. No more mazes. I'm like, find it all. Find the eggs, the Easter eggs, the scavenger hunt, the maze, if you will.
Thanks, Landon, and great catch on that. Next up, we've got Black Box, who's a longtime listener with his first voicemail. Black Box, by the way, set up our Discord. So if you do want to check that out, you can go to chatpod.com/Discord and join our little community where we're chatting all day long. But Black Box called in with a question about Christina.
What's going on, Shack Crew? This is Black Box, longtime listener, first time caller. I got a couple things about Christina I wanted to bounce off you. I don't know if this is going to make sense or not, but I'm thinking that Christina has been in charge of this entire show thus far, and it's been in her creating video games that are actually coming to life. So Christina's boss mentioned the great storyline that she had that was full of sex and depression, and then everybody died. That's the first 2 seasons of Westworld. The one that she was working on with the middle-aged, or the young girl and her dad who was in a wheelchair, that could loosely be translated to Caleb in season 3. And just how, you know, all of the stories that she comes up with are turning to life. The other thing I noticed is they did not mention, at least I don't think, they did not mention the 7-year gap in her storyline. They mentioned it in Williams, they mentioned it in Caleb's, and I didn't remember that it was in the Christina storyline. So that's where I'm leaning. Thanks, guys. Bye.
I think that this is something. So I've read this theory in a couple of places, and Black Box, thanks so much for writing in about it. I'll just say this. I will be very disappointed if this is like the Christina hand of God that is like writing all of Westworld, and like it's somehow like out of her mind and memory, and they stole the stories that she wrote. Like I'll be really bummed if that's the case. But what I do think that's brilliant about what you point out here is that clearly they don't mention that 7-year time difference, which I think is the biggest red flag to us, that I don't know necessarily that we're on an alternate timeline as much as we are not sure whether or not if what we're seeing is real, or if what we're seeing is a flashback or not. So I do think that you're very smart to point that out, but I don't know about Eugene, but I hope that's not the case.
Yeah, where I think this theory might fall short is it doesn't explain the anomalies in her life, right? If she is experiencing these anomalies, why, right? If she is the author of all this and she's living in normal world, what's going on in her world that's causing all these things to happen? And it doesn't quite click for me, but perhaps I'm not understanding the theory correctly. But anyway, thanks for calling in, Black Box. Let us know more about this. Either write in or call in and fill us in, or just hit me up on Discord.
And it's nice to hear your voice. That's not in Rocket League, although we're overdue for a Rocket League championship.
Next up, we've got one from Steve, who called in about Christina's painting.
Hi, Steve here from Bethesda. In Dolores' room, there's a painting with an easel on it. One morning she wakes up, there's a blue building on the right. Then the second morning on the painting, the blue building's on the left. This could mean that either she's in a simulation one morning and the real world the second morning, or there are two different simulations. What do you guys think?
I think we're all going to feel really dumb if it's not a simulation. That's the only thing. When they said that this was going to be a very straightforward season, I keep going back to that and going, how? Yeah. How? There's got to be a simulation or a loop or something involved here. Because Steve, you're absolutely right. It's just right there in front of our faces. And I don't think they're trying to hide it. And I do think they're trying to get us thinking about it. So I don't know how the hell they would reconcile that with this just being a straightforward story where there just happens to be this woman named Christina who happens to look just like Dolores, and she's just having these things happen in her life.
So two things. One, the straightforward season. This reminds me of the people in your life that are like the smartest people that you know. And they're like, oh, no. Like, this is really easy. This is really simple. And then they explain it to you. And because they're so hyper intelligent, it still is like lacking in all simplicity, right? I think we may be dealing with that here because clearly the showrunners are incredibly brilliant people. So I don't know if necessarily what you would think of when you hear simple, like this is going to be like Westworld simple, which doesn't mean necessarily that it's simple, right? And then the other piece is, I mean, I don't mean to keep going back to the Matrix, but remember the Matrix, the way you know that it's a simulation are those little glitches, the inconsistencies and the pattern and the cat, right? That deja vu that walks back and forth, the little things that are off. So maybe the switch in color or the switch of the position of the building, maybe that is meant to give her the clue that this is not real.
Thanks, Steve, for calling in. And from Steve, we go to Stephen in South Africa, who has another idea about Christina.
Hi there, it's Stephen from South Africa, and I know it's most probably the most simple of approach, but I can't stop thinking that most probably Christina is a pre-Park form of Dolores, and that we're looking at different timelines again.
So I want to give major credit not just to our listener who just called in, but also to Kevin Harmon on Twitter, who tweeted me this exact theory earlier, where he was talking about how what if Christine is the human inspiration for Dolores and Teddy is a Delos guy partially responsible for creating her in the park later, right? I think that is a brilliant theory. And I'm going to put on my very beautiful tinfoil hat right now, which I know you hate, Jean, so I'll take it off in just a second. But putting on my tinfoil, this is the one I like the most. I would be very satisfied with this type of a storyline. And the biggest piece of evidence that I think speaks to Steven's and to Kevin's point here is that we were talking in the deep dive about how, you know, she's walking down the street and those guys are like, have you heard about the sick park, man? Like, it could be that the talk of the park's opening has just started at that point. And that's why people are talking in that way. Not that it's a new iteration of these parks, but that the actual things are being developed.
And this concept wouldn't conflict with my objection based on the fact that there are these anomalies, because there could be anomalies due to some other occurrences, right? There is technology in the world. She is working on stuff. And so there could be something odd happening in her life that is not related to the park just yet. It's a completely separate situation. Thanks, Stephen, for your voicemail. And wrapping up our voicemail, we've got one from Jonathan in Vegas.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy said that they already have like a 5-season arc already planned. And it was like a microscope slowly moving out of the park, like in episode 1. Slowly moving out, and you're slowly moving into the world. I don't know too much that's going on other than I think flies are important, and I definitely believe the man in black is a robot. You guys are really great. I love the stuff that you guys do and that you guys put out. Let's not jump the gun too early on the first episode here. It's been 2 years. There's still a lot of stuff that we need to remember and go through. But I think that the season's heading in like a pretty good direction. And I look forward to leaving you guys more voicemails as the season progresses. Miss you guys. Take care. All right. Bye.
Oh.
When Jonathan wrote in with this, it got me thinking about The Wire, oddly enough, because The Wire was 5 seasons as well. And it started off on one very, very specific topic of heroin and the street trade. And it goes all the way up into politics and economics and Baltimore as a whole. Schools. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so this is a really interesting take on it, Jonathan, because you're absolutely right. We started off in the park with the lives of the hosts. Mm-hmm. Then it went into multiple parks. Then it went into the world. And now maybe we're going even beyond that. I love this idea and this concept of the microscope analogy.
I do too. I think it's really, really brilliant. And I just want to say we have received so much love over the last week of people very similar to what Jonathan just said of like, we're so glad you're back. We missed you. It has made me just fall in love again with our chat community. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much to all of that. And I don't know about you, Gene, but I forgot how much I love doing TV because of the community. I stopped working for multiple hours today. Don't tell my boss, because I was so enthralled with the theories and the things that we were getting in. And this is going to be, no matter if the show's good or not, this is going to be a really fun 8 weeks.
Movies is a whole different animal, and it is a lot less work. It's much more casual. We don't have to worry about being wrong. We don't have to be up at all hours of the night, like scanning what everybody's sending in. But the interaction level goes up to a whole other echelon when we get into TV. So absolutely.
Well, and I think we forget that the last time we did this was when the pandemic started. We were doing Westworld 3 when the pandemic really started the shit hit the fan, right? And so this is almost like those things like right now where like my brother's about to be with his friendship group for the first time in like 3 years, right? Well, 2 years. They're all going to a wedding finally together. Like it just feels like the family's back together again.
Thanks, Jonathan, for your voicemail. Let's move back to email. And this one, we've got an email from Stan talking about his thoughts on the season 4 opener.
One Stan wrote in and said, "Hey guys, great to have you back and great to have the show back. Just thought I'd share my thoughts on what we observed in the season opener. Based upon Lisa Joy saying the show was more straightforward, I think we can assume that Teddy is in the Sublime, and therefore Dostina is also. 8 years have passed in the real world, and who knows how many in the Sublime. So it's not hard to imagine that the world built in the Sublime has surpassed our own evolution, but with lessons learned. The technology to create the park, therefore, will be present in the Sublime, so Bernard would have no trouble recreating Dolores as Christina. As to the narratives that Dostina and her colleagues create, I think it could be some sort of VR access to the Sublime for real-world people. Peter could be an NPC, but he could also be a player. Alternatively, the Sublime is such a wonderful place that nobody questions their reality. In fact, everybody's just writing narratives for each other at the whim of some Rehoboam-type creation. There is a shot in the opening sequence. Can we talk about the new title sequence? Which, if you look at it through my eyes, it looks a little bit like a lot of people sitting in front of a screen, a hive mind connected by the stories we write for each other. As always, I start out relatively sensible and then end up in God knows wheresville. Keep up the good work, and for God's sake, try to enjoy the show on first watch, even if it lessens my enjoyment of the Instacast. Love to you all, Stan.
Stan, this idea, if I'm understanding it correctly, is the concept that we are bound by our concept of a linear time, right? So time passes for us in minutes, hours. We can't speed it up. We can't slow it down. If you have, as you were saying, the Sublime, and if it is computerized, it is digitized, time can move much, much faster. It can process much faster. Evolution can happen faster. The world can change faster. And in fact, things that would be technologically impossible within a given amount of time for us are infinitely possible within the Sublime because it could happen as fast as the computation could happen. Whoa.
I don't know how they'll do that, right? Like, that's my only thing is like, how would they show a world within a world within a world, right? Like, and I'm not saying they can't, but I don't know. I'll be curious. I think it's interesting. It definitely, I think, is an interesting idea. And we do try to enjoy the show on the first watch. It just doesn't always happen if it's not as good as we want it to be. But we'll try for you, Stan.
Yeah, the tough part, Stan, is we got the Instacast. So
yeah,
it's immediate like gut reaction within, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of watching the show. So there's no time to really process everything. But I wouldn't say that I don't enjoy it on the first watch. I'm just analyzing it at the same time. Thanks, Stan, for your email. We've got a pair now from Nick B.
Well, the first one says, folks, after binging season 3 this weekend and just finishing the first episode of season 4, all I can say is that I'm hooked and eager for next week. Some quick hot takes. The flies thing scares the hell out of me, but I want to learn more. I wanted to see Bernard and Zombie Stubbs, and I'm glad to see Caleb with a better wig or his real hair this season. With all that said, I wanted to just add my insight and my big takeaway from this episode, and that's how much soldiers miss war. Big D might be able to attest to this, but from my time downrange, I can tell you there's a comfort in having an enemy that's trying to kill you, and your daily task is to make that not happen through any means possible. To the uninitiated, this might sound terrifying, but to those of us who've lived through it, there's a warm comfort from being in an active war zone and having a purpose carry you through every moment of the day. The complications of daily life melt away, and your sole task becomes the mission at hand. This episode highlights a lot of characters that have lost their way as they are no longer on their mission or narrative. Caleb is going back to being an invisible service worker instead of the leader of the revolution. Dolores is living as an NPC, crafting stories about NPCs. And Maeve is pulling a Flynn from Tron 2 by removing herself from the fight. The 3 leaders of the revolution are not on the path that they were destined to be on, and we can see that this might have created an emptiness inside each of them. I don't have any grand predictions as to what will happen, but I can sympathize with each of them, especially Caleb, and that it's hard to go back to normal life after you've lived through going to war. We are grateful for the simplicity of being home and safe, but there is a hole in each of us, some are bigger than others, that misses that sense of purpose. I wonder if filling that hole is something that's going to drive Caleb or any other characters this season. Regardless, it's great to have the show back, and I look forward to hearing you all dig into each episode this season. Longtime listener, Nick B.
Nick, I love this email and the idea about, soldiers missing war, missing that sense of purpose. I mean, it is hard to go, as you said, from the leader of a revolution to just doing tasks, right? Just daily tasks and living a domestic life. At the same time, I felt like it was incredibly unfair of Caleb's wife to be like, oh, you just missed the war. He's like, no, man, like, it's not that long after a robot overlord was involved in the world. And it's totally reasonable to believe that you're under threat. So I don't think that he's paranoid, but does he miss it?
Well, and Nick wrote in another email and he said, folks, it's good to be back and hear you all. Are you going to be active on any Reddit discussions? I scanned the front page of that site for information. I haven't gotten to the bottom, but one day. And I never go diving deeper than the main page. However, I've seen a lot of links and pages that talk about Obi-Wan episode discussion pages, along with other shows doing the same. This might be something to get good info and to get the word out on the podcast. Or it might be a vitriolic pit of spoilers, obscure internet jokes, and shit throwing. Reddit. Anyways, just wanted to toss that idea out there and let you do with it as you please. I think what you've done with the Telegraph is great, and we'll see if I call him with my real voice or not. Also, I had to take a hiatus from listening to Shot the Movies after your vigorous wiping of my childhood favorite, Willow. Maybe you all can come back and cover the new series. Just another idea. After all, people love nostalgia, but they also love shitting on it. This could be the perfect show for the Chat Crew. Again, glad to have you all, and Westworld back, Nick B.
I think we should just make Big D do Willow the show all on his own.
As punishment for missing the first week of Westworld by going on vacation. I think that that's a brilliant punishment. But I just want to say this, Nick. So I lose like 10% of my life to Reddit. I am on Reddit so much. I don't buy a house. I don't make big decisions about things like washer dryers or even like car cleaner without consulting Reddit. But one thing I don't consult Reddit about is this show. And the reason for it is that you want to talk about a hole of tinfoil, spoilery bullshit. It is Reddit. And so I learned my lesson with Game of Thrones. And so Reddit for all things, but shot on TV.
Next up, we've got an email from Discount Dawn.
Do you need bodyguards but don't have a lot of cash? Are you wanting a super sentient ninja robot on a budget? Come on down to Don's Discount Minions. Aren't you tired of suppliers who dress their minions in camouflage and body armor and then charge you extra? Down here at Don's, all our minions are dressed in black, the cheapest color. Plans, tactics, marksmanship, those sound mighty expensive to me. Our minions stand in plain sight or wander off on their own, and we pass the savings on to you. Don, you say, do you offer a guarantee of success? Guarantees? Who has time for all that paperwork? What I do guarantee is that our minions are so cheap, you can send wave after wave until one gets lucky. Don't wait. Come on down to Don's Discount Minions today.
Discount Don, I know that this is meant in jest, but it is a great call out. The man in black, if he is sending these hosts after Maeve, after Caleb, should know what they're capable of. These are not exactly the smartest guys in the world that they're sending out for them. And they are quite expendable, as you said. Ash, we talked in previous episodes about the advancement of technology over the 7 years that has passed since season 3. And one of our listeners, John G., wrote in to talk about that.
Hey there. Just wanted to quickly pop in to point out that those who think hosts should be way more advanced just because time has passed are not describing a plot hole. iPhones don't change over time automatically just because time passes. iPhones change over time because they need to sell more iPhones to keep making profit. To get you to buy a new iPhone when you already have an iPhone, they need to create a reason for you to want to do that. The hosts are more like animatronics at Disneyland. Yes, they do change over time, but it's more like there's the originals, then way down the line. When it makes sense financially for Disneyland and there's enough of a difference in technology, they'll sweep through and replace all of them. They aren't selling them individually to consumers. They are an aspect of the park that attract guests to the park. Now, in Westworld, the park is closed. The creative technology that created the host is dead. Why would hosts be any different from what they were when the revolt happened at the end of season 1? If anything, the focus at Delos would be on recovering that human data, which MIB seems to be doing. John J.
John, I don't think anyone ever said the words plot hole. I don't think that's what we're saying at all. What we were saying was, at least what I was saying was, that we were excited by the possibility of technological advancements among the hosts. Why? Because the guy that owns them is not worried about making money. And if you remember the man in black in season 1, what was his drive? He wants to raise the stakes of the game. He wants them to be able to fight back and win. He wants humans to be able to lose. We don't necessarily know his motivations right now, but it is not far-fetched to say that this guy wants to make something more of the hosts than they already were. And again, it wasn't a plot hole. It was an excitement over the possibility of a next generation host being present on the show.
And so all we're saying is that these hosts are going to be old tech now. If there are new hosts out there, I can't imagine that they'll stand up to them. It's the whole Terminator effect, right? The reason why Arnold had such a big task in T2 is because the new version of the Terminator was so much more technologically advanced than he was. And so you've got original hosts like Maeve going against a Man in Black potential host that is fidelity tested, that is a newer version, a newer model. That's going to be a big ask. That's going to take a lot more than a katana blade for her to figure out how to, get through between she and half balding Aaron Paul. I mean, that's not much against that brand new model.
Especially considering Maeve runs on wine. That's a big vulnerability.
She's just a lady that enjoys her wine nights and her Hallmark movies in the middle of nowhere of Montana.
All right, that'll close it up for this week. Again, if you want to write in for next week, you can get started right now. You can write us at hosts@shatontv.com or leave a voicemail using SpeakPipe at shatpod.com/TV and go to the SpeakPipe feature. We really, really appreciate everybody who wrote in, who called in. And again, those emails will be on the website soon where we respond to all of them. So if you didn't hear yours this week, it might show up in a future week, or you might see it on the website. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld Telegraph. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatpod.com/TV. Wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Ash and Big D, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us Sunday for the next Westworld Instacast.